Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. A few years back, I was working for a major tech company. My job involved moving between floors frequently because I was responsible for keeping the tech side of business operations running smoothly for those who communicated with customers and clients. There was this one woman, let's call her Karen, who was quite problematic. She had a history of being involved in numerous terminations due to alleged harassment claims. I had to interact with her several times a week on a regular basis. Now I've got some trust issues and generally view the workplace as a minefield. I tend to have a "my colleagues are potential threats" mentality. Call me paranoid or anxious, but that's just how I am. Because of this, I record every conversation I have. I keep a recording device running at all times using a pen recorder I carry in my shirt pocket. The audio quality is impressive. Let me tell you what happened. One day I was doing some work after completely replacing the computers and much of the tech on Karen's floor. I had to walk behind her and several other people who were at their desks working. As I was passing by carrying multiple keyboards, one of them accidentally hit the back of her chair. I was talking into my headset to a colleague at the time. Karen turned around abruptly and glared at me but didn't say anything. I finished my work for the day and went home, thinking nothing of it. The next day, I arrived at work only to be met by security and taken up to the HR floor. To my shock, Karen had made a serious accusation against me, claiming I had made a sexual comment and groped her. I was being terminated on the spot. After they finished explaining everything and handed me the paperwork, I pulled out my laptop and quickly accessed the security camera feed, which unfortunately had no audio. The HR representative, let's call her Sarah, said, "Well, there's no audio to support your side of the story, so..." I interrupted. "Actually, I record everything I say or do while working here." Sarah's eyes widened. "You do what?" I calmly replied, "It's for my own protection. Let me show you." I then slowly pulled up the recording from the previous day and let them listen to all of it. The company lawyer in the room, we'll call him Mr. Johnson, had the most disgruntled expression I've ever seen. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat. "Well, this certainly changes things. With their grounds for termination now invalidated, I immediately filed an HR complaint and threatened legal action." Karen was terminated a few days later. About a week after that, they ended up investigating her for embezzlement because they conduct a basic full investigation into anyone who's terminated. It turned out she had been stealing company money through an expenses card. The amount was apparently substantial because sometime afterwards she ended up serving time in prison. Sarah approached me a few days later. "I have to admit, your recording saved you from a very difficult situation. But isn't it a bit extreme to record everything?" I shrugged. In this case, it proved necessary. I'd rather be safe than sorry. It was quite an experience. For me, it justified viewing your coworkers as potential threats and recording interactions. Also, it reinforced my belief to never fully trust HR. Later, I found out that the pen recorder I used was actually a Bookstore product I had gotten at a discount when my sister used to manage a Bookstore store. It's not voice activated, it records continuously while turned on. I should mention that my laptop wasn't a recording device itself. It just had access to the camera system that surveyed every floor. And for those wondering how Karen could claim I groped her while she was sitting, the office chairs had gaps through which such an action would have been plausible. This whole ordeal taught me a valuable lesson about workplace dynamics and the importance of protecting oneself. While it might seem paranoid to some, in this instance, my caution paid off in a big way. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought buying my dream house would land me in a legal battle, but here we are. Let me take you back to where it all started. I'd been saving up for years to buy a place of my own. After countless viewings and disappointments, I finally found the perfect spot, a beautiful piece of land just outside the city limits with an amazing view of the mountains. The property was everything I wanted and more. It wasn't part of any homeowner association, which was a huge plus in my book. I'd heard horror stories about overbearing homeowner associations and wanted no part of that drama. The sale went through smoothly, and I was over the moon. I spent the next few months working with an architect to design my dream home. We made sure to incorporate large windows to make the most of the gorgeous view. Construction began, and I watched with excitement as my house slowly took shape. About halfway through the build, I got an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 50s, dressed like she was heading to a country club, marched up to me with a stern look on her face. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. I'm Linda, the president of the Scenic Hills Homeowner Association. We need to talk about your construction project. I was confused. I'm sorry, but this property isn't part of any homeowner association. What seems to be the problem? Linda's face tightened. Well, that's the issue. Your house is blocking the view for our residents. We can't have that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ma'am, I'm not sure what you want me to do. This is my property, and I'm well within my rights to build here. We'll see about that, she snapped, turning on her heel and stomping off. I shrugged it off as an empty threat and went back to focusing on the build. But a week later, I got served with papers. The Scenic Hills Homeowner Association was suing me, claiming my house was a nuisance that decreased property values in their neighborhood by obstructing views. I was floored. How could they sue me for building on my own land, outside their jurisdiction? I immediately called up a lawyer friend, Jake, to get his take. This is ridiculous, Jake said after looking over the lawsuit. They don't have a leg to stand on. Your property isn't even in their homeowner association. But we'll need to fight this in court to get it thrown out. And so began a months-long legal battle that I never asked for. The homeowner association's lawyer tried every trick in the book. They claimed my house violated zoning laws. It didn't. That it was an eyesore, purely subjective. And even tried to argue that the homeowner association had some sort of easement on the view. They absolutely did not. Throughout it all, Linda and her homeowner association cronies tried to make my life miserable. They'd drive by the construction site, taking photos and yelling insults. A few times I caught them trying to trespass on the property, claiming they were just looking around. I had to put up cameras and no trespassing signs to keep them at bay. The worst part was, all this legal nonsense was delaying my build. Contractors were hesitant to continue work with a lawsuit hanging over the project. My dream home was turning into a nightmare. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we had our day in court. Jake was brilliant, systematically tearing apart every argument the homeowner association's lawyer tried to make. He presented clear evidence that my house was fully compliant with all local laws and regulations. He even brought in a real estate expert who testified that my house had zero impact on the homeowner association's property values. The judge, clearly annoyed by the whole affair, didn't take long to make his decision. He dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning the homeowner association couldn't refile. But the best part? He ordered the homeowner association to pay all my legal fees and damages for the construction delays. You should have seen Linda's face when the verdict was read. She turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. As we left the courthouse, I couldn't resist a little dig. "Hey, Linda," I called out. "Thanks for the housewarming gift. The legal fees will really help with the landscaping." She sputtered something unintelligible and stormed off. With the lawsuit behind me, I was able to finish building my house. And let me tell you, the view is even more satisfying now. Every time I look out my window at those mountains, I think about how I stood my ground against a bunch of entitled bullies. The icing on the cake? A few months after I moved in, I started noticing for sale signs popping up in the homeowner association neighborhood. Turns out a lot of residents weren't too happy about their dues being used to fund a frivolous lawsuit. Last I heard, Linda was voted out as homeowner association president and the whole board was replaced. As for me, I'm enjoying my homeowner association free life. I painted my house a nice shade of purple, take that, Linda. And I'm thinking about putting up a giant statue of a middle finger in my front yard. Okay, maybe not that last part, but it's nice to know I could if I wanted to. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson. Stand up for your rights, even when faced with seemingly powerful opposition. And always, always read the fine print before buying property. You never know when you might end up with a view-obsessed homeowner association as a neighbor. The next one is a petty revenge story. This took place many years ago, but it is a very fresh memory. Wife and I were shopping at IKEA, and when leaving, a giant SUV with a for sale sign and a phone number scribbled on it cut us off in traffic. It was blatant, and we had to hit the brakes hard to avoid hitting them. I asked my wife to take a picture of the phone number, and she did, so each day for the next 2 weeks, I would call the number to ask questions about the vehicle once I got to work. Here is where it gets petty. I get to work at 5:30 a.m., so for 9 weekdays, I get every other Friday off. I called the number at 5:30 from a phone far from my office in a common area. There was no way to tie the calls back to me as there were many of us arriving around that time too. They stopped answering after 3 days, but I kept calling. The next one is a malicious compliance story. For many years I was the opening server or bartender for the weekend breakfast at a country club in a gated community for active adults. Technically, it was 65 and up, although up to 10% of the population could be 55 to 64. However, that was never an issue. I would say most were 70 in UP. I've never minded customers who were picky and complicated as long as they weren't jerks. I've learned how to put up with a lot. My goal was to give everyone exactly what they wanted as efficiently as possible. And since the majority of the clientele were regulars, it became fairly easy to remember everyone's particulars. I had a regular in his mid to late 70s who was a crankly old thing, but harmless. His ribbing was easy to ignore for the most part. I knew what he wanted, got it out, got my tip, and carried on. Hell, sometimes we even got along. He was either by himself, with a friend from outside the community, with his 2 sons, or the whole lot of them. Despite being a brunette, he always called me, and most other women working, Blondie, our universal name, apparently. "Hey, Blondie, get me a top off." "Hey, Blondie, I need some more ketchup." And he was just generally pessimistic, like someone had pissed in his Cheerios. He sons always gave me apologetic looks. I would shrug or laugh something off, and they'd tip me a bit extra. He would tap his coffee cup if he needed a refill. Hey, I don't mind. Don't need to get in a whole conversation. I get in, get out, and on to checking the next table. I would always fill a cup to about a 3/4 inch from the top. Seemed reasonable and no one had ever complained. These aren't large cups, but it was enough room to add cream sugar or to just not spill on yourself. After a year or two, that was no longer acceptable. He randomly started making comments about how I, or others, didn't know how to fill a cup up. I would usually smile, joke, and add a bit more. But one morning, it was slammed. I was bartending with a fairly full bar, taking to-go orders on the phone, getting the golfers food or drinks after their first 9, and had 2 4 tops in addition to that. Of course, he wanted my section. It was busy, but I was sailing. Getting to work at 6:30 a.m. didn't always have me in the best mood, but one musters through. Fake it till you make it. But all 4 of them were there, and he had an audience to whom he could show off his condescending comments. His mighty prowess cutting down a 25-year-old woman and putting her in her place. He had already complained about my inability to pour a proper cup of coffee. I was going to greet a table when all of a sudden he says, "Hey, Blondie," and taps on his cup. So, with a crap-eating grin, I filled it to the very tip-top, not even a drop spilling out. His son's eyes grew large. He startled to sputter, trying to ineloquently say that's not what he wanted. "No, no, sir, I never know how to fill up a cup, wouldn't want to have that." He grumbled, of course, and his son's eyes finally started twinkling. They finished their food, paid, and left. He never did complain again about my inability to refill his coffee. My revenge was minor, but the satisfaction was sweet. Got to get joy in that industry somewhere, right? The next one is an entitled people's story. So, this happened a few years ago at a major airport in the US. I worked as a pilot for an airline, and in the course of my duties I ride our aircraft to from home to our crew base. I often did this out uniform, with my only identifying feature being my work ID lanyard. My last flight before time off put us on the ground around noon. Being off duty, I immediately changed out of my uniform and took a seat from the gate where my flight home would depart from. Behind me there was a rambunctious child that was using the seats as her personal playground and randomly screaming while doing so. While this is annoying, and the squeals are like nails on a chalkboard to me, it's the reality of things. I just ignore it and browse through my tablet. Next thing I know, I catch a full scream into my ear. I turn my head and the kid is literally a couple of centimeters from my face and is hanging off the back of my chair. I immediately snapped at the kid, "Do not scream into my ear." That is when the Karen mother, who was just letting this happen, loses her crap. She darts up, standing over the seat behind me, yelling at me, "Don't you yell at my kid, how dare you!" The kid, meanwhile, has a shocked look, but settles down, goes silent. Karen continues on, trying to goad me into arguing with her and doing everything but actually putting hands on me to escalate this into a physical fight. She even tries to encourage her kid to scream again, to which the kid just sat there quietly, and initially stare at her for a few seconds, then went back to ignoring her, the situation, and go back to looking at my tablet. She continues having a meltdown of one for 10 minutes before the man with her collected her, the kid, their things, and went elsewhere. I feel bad for the kid, as I cannot see her future ending well with that sort of guidance. It was also a shame that the mother flipped, as I likely would have given the kid wings that my company supplies us with after the kid calmed down. The next one is an entitled parent's story. I'm sorry. I need to vent because I'm shocked and worried about this child. This just happened and I'm running off adrenaline. My Fitbit says my heart rate is 130 BPM. For context, I currently live in a suburb in Texas. My son's primary school is on a long stretch of road. It's 5 lanes. The speed limit is 70 mph. During school zone hours, it's 30 mph. The school sits right in the middle and the crosswalks are at least half a mile each way, maybe more. The point is, it's not close. One's closer than the other, but it's not a brisk walk. It's a trek. This road is also very popular since it leads into the city and houses all tiers of public education. There are giant trucks, working trucks, and all manners of cars at any given hour. It's super backed up during school hours. So here we are. My husband is pulling out of the school, and it's a chore because of the heavy traffic. He notices a kid right next to us on the sidewalk, showing signs of looking down these 5 lanes. He better not be trying to cross the street, what the duck? He hardly mentions before slamming the pedal. The kid had stepped into the road and my husband pulled immediately into the street to stop the people on that lane. The kid pulls back. I jump out of the car and yell at the kid to immediately discourage anything. "Stop!" cried the archdeacon. Let me tell you, this kid was not fine. I couldn't get a word out of him and he couldn't explain to me what he was doing. He was panicked, blubbering, and looking to the other side. I had to hold him so he'd stop trying. He kept looking toward a cyclist on the other side of the road. She was yelling at me. You can't hear it for over 5 lanes. I figured it was his mom, so I asked, "Do you want me to drive him to you?" She did not like that. This crazy idiot barged down those 5 lanes, thus further worsening public opinion over cyclists. She was in her entire gear, and yet she left her bike on the other side. She tossed it down. She stormed onto the road holding out her hand. The cars rolled into a stop, the last one being a gigantic Texas truck whose hood was at her shoulder. "What's the problem here?" She had the audacity to ask me as if I just didn't pull a Greg Abbott on an abortion. I suppose at 4/17/42 weeks, there could be exceptions. "Are you his mother?" I laid down the narrative to judge her character above her preferred mode of transportation. "Yes, I am." She rambled here, but I don't speak crazy. I cut her off. "Okay, but he was trying to cross the street." "I know. We're practicing." My goodness, I can't tell you the way my heart sank to hear that this woman planned to put her 8-year-old son into this situation and fully intended for him to do so on his own, as if it takes exposure therapy to get over one's fear of getting hit by a Ducking a Punisher logo-clad murder truck. And now, I'm not a busybody. I disengage with people whose tone screams entitlement. It's a skill you master in Texas. I am, however, shamelessly confrontational when it involves a child who can't defend themselves. I turned toward my husband, who had now parked back inside the school's lot, and yelled, "Hey, it's okay, they're just practicing endangering the life of a child." He screamed back, "What?" because again, 5 lanes. But I pretended he could hear me. I added, "I know, who does that? Not me, a normal person," because I was just being an idiot right back to that lady. She had taken her son to the side, knelt and held his hands, and was rambling to him her crazy nonsense about me. Once those people go off, you can control the energy they spend on you and keep them engaged in some way. I wanted her to stay there because I wasn't gonna let it go. I needed the good guys, though, those forged by the fires of crazy. I stormed right into the school building and knocked on the office window, where 3 lovely women of varying levels of administrative power were already there. I opened up dramatically again. "This is urgent. A kid tried to cross the street on his own. He almost got hit. I stopped him and his mother told me they were practicing." Those wonderful women were in disbelief, as those with functioning amygdalas would typically be. They tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but once I pointed out that she was in her cyclist gear and her bike was 5 lanes away, they started to call in the cavalry. The lady most intent on stopping her took the walkie-talkie from the other lady and stormed out. The now walkie-talkie-less lady asked me a bit more about what happened. I reiterated my brief experience, emphasizing the road being crossed right there where the bike lay, and she finally believed that it happened. They mostly talked to themselves about their rules for children on that road. It was nice to hear they already had them down to specifics, as one would assume. It was the whole reason I went to go be a dirty snitch. I only knew that jaywalking was illegal in all of Texas. I break it all the time myself on the road, but it's a special kind of ducking demented to make a young child do it on his own. In Texas, where one more lane is our only understanding of infrastructure next to sky roads, and your tax money builds my buddy's privatized tolls, lol. From here on, it wasn't my problem anymore. I only lingered slowly like the smug a-hole I am to make sure the walk-talkie lady managed to engage the mother. When we drove past them, the mother glared daggers at me while yelling at the walkie-talkie lady, so I waved at her with a warm smile. Bless her heart, she thinks she's right. Deep down, though, I'm still panicked that it even happened. I know the school will handle it. They have a really good security system involving rules and volunteers because sadly, that's what we've needed to resort to since Uvalde. They will make that lady know she's no exception to these keep child alive rules as long as she's on their property. She's free to kill him elsewhere, though. Honestly, that last part is what will keep me up at night. That poor kid was a mess when I talked to him. He couldn't communicate with me and he was terrified of his mother. The least I can do is keep an eye out for him each day after school to make sure she doesn't try to pull that stunt again. Well, that wraps up my story. My heart rate is now 115. It helped, I guess. Edit. Hello, let me clear things up. Rules were broken by the child to get where he was. He was missed by people because he walked through a grassy area. There's no sidewalks or crosswalks connected there, and there is only forested area across those lanes. No houses, no stores, no buildings whatsoever. His mother probably instructed him to get him there. I'm not sure where she came from or where she intended to go. All my comments are jokes. I use humor to cope. Read this in a sardonic tone. I don't hold any strong opinion over anything. I hated everyone involved that put the child in danger. Lastly, we have a tiny car, and even I miss the kid because it's such an insane place to look for a kid. His mother went above and beyond in crossing a lot of rules for her convenience that no one thought possible. This will probably lead to a new rule now. The next one is an entitled people's story. It was a story that took place a few years ago, a tale of triumph against an entitled neighbor who dared to trespass on my land. As a teenager, I witnessed my father and I confront this arrogant individual, standing up for our rights and the sanctity of our property. You see, my parents owned a vast piece of land, sprawling across 112 acres, some of it used for farming and the rest left unoccupied but well maintained. Unfortunately, trespassing and illegal dumping had become a recurring issue. Despite my father's efforts to fence and gate off the entire property, it seemed to do little to dissuade those who sought unauthorized access. ATV and quad bike tire marks became all too familiar, evidence of unwelcome visitors on our land. My father, a passionate gun enthusiast, had instilled in me a love for firearms. We spent countless hours honing our shooting skills, engaging in target practice and hunting excursions as the seasons dictated. Our camping trips on our land had become treasured memories, forging a strong bond between father, son, and our loyal chocolate Labrador Beau. As autumn descended, we embarked on yet another camping and hunting expedition. Driving deep into our property, approximately 1.5 miles away, we settled into a clearing my father had carefully prepared for our tent and fire. Excitement filled the air as we set up our guns and tree stands, eagerly anticipating the sight of majestic game. My chance finally came when a mature buck with magnificent antlers, at least 10 points, appeared before us. It was a moment that could mark my first hunting triumph, a trophy I would be immensely proud of. However, my first shot missed its mark, only grazing the deer's shoulder. The wounded animal fled, forcing us to track its blood trail for about 20 yards before we discovered it, still alive but suffering. My father swiftly ended its pain with a well-placed gunshot, though remorse tinged my heart. This incident reaffirmed my decision not to make hunting a regular practice. Not long after, the sound of an approaching engine shattered the tranquility. My father, now aware of the noise, joined me in listening attentively. 2 ATVs soon materialized, one carrying a kid younger than me, accompanied by a man who appeared to be his father. The man, sporting a beer gut and dressed in full camouflage, approached us with an aggressive demeanor, instantly startling our faithful companion, Beau, into a frenzy of barks. In an attempt to defuse the situation, my father approached the man, but Beau's barking persisted. Undeterred, the man berated our dog, venomously commanding him to shut the duck up. Sensing trouble, my father ushered Beau away and initiated a conversation with this unpleasant individual. To say that the man was hostile would be an understatement. He launched into a tirade, accusing my father of endangering his son with our gunfire. The absurdity of his claim left me initially bewildered. After all, we were on our own land. It slowly dawned on me that this man was not only a nuisance, but also an unapologetic jackass. When my father calmly explained that we were shooting into an area with a dense hillside as a backdrop, the man merely laughed, dismissing the safety concerns. Arrogantly, he declared that our shooting was illegal. At that moment, I mustered the courage to interject. informing him that it was deer season, and we possessed the necessary licenses. However, he swiftly silenced me, commanding me to shut my mouth and let the adults handle the conversation. With his patience wearing thin, my father asked, "Did you notice the no trespassing signs when you entered this land?" The man scoffed, claiming he had been using the land for months and had even created his own path of access. Astonished, my father clarified, "Are you aware that this is our land, not yours?" The man, oozing with smugness, insisted he knew the owner and had permission to use it. He threatened to call both the police and the owner to report our alleged illegal activities, child endangerment and trespassing. My father welcomed the call to the police, unfazed by the man's threats. He promptly dialed my mother, instructing her to bring the property deed and our surveyor's paperwork. Meanwhile, we loaded the deer into the back of our truck, only fueling the man's taunting remarks. "Can't wait for the cops to seize that illegally killed deer," he jeered, poisoning his young son's mind against us. A giant turd of a man indeed. I couldn't help but feel sympathy for the young boy caught in the midst of this unpleasant encounter. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the police arrived, their annoyance at the situation palpable. They wasted no time redirecting their irritation toward the rightful culprit. The officer approached us first, acknowledging my father's ownership by perusing the property paperwork, even complimenting me on my first deer. "A 10-point buck for a 15-year-old? Impressive, kid," he exclaimed, patting me on the shoulder. He advised my father and me to remain calm and assured us that he would swiftly resolve the matter. The officer then turned his attention to the man, who eagerly regaled him with tales of knowing the landowner and possessing permission to use the property. When pressed to reveal the owner's name, he conveniently suffered from a sudden bout of amnesia. With a nod in our direction, the officer deftly pointed out, "Right, because they own the land." Panic washed over the ATV rider as the officer continued, "Did you notice the no trespassing signs when you entered?" It became increasingly clear that the man was cornered. To our satisfaction, the officer uncovered additional charges against him, stacking the deck against his reckless behavior. As the man stuttered and stumbled through his explanation, the officer inquired about vehicle registration. His response, neither ATV was registered, led to further penalties, compounding his legal woes. Defeated, the man left with his tail between his legs. He and his son trudged back to their vehicle, pushing their ATVs along while enduring the weight of trespassing fines and penalties for unregistered vehicles. As we drove past them, my father couldn't resist a parting shot. "Hey, I'd offer you a lift, but the deer in my truck bed takes up all the space." With a satisfied smile, we left the scene, our land once again secure. Our encounter with the entitled neighbor had transformed into a resounding victory for justice. This experience remains etched in my memory, a testament to my father's resilience and the importance of standing up for what is rightfully ours. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Set the scene. The place we were renting is a duplex that is split down the middle here in upstate NY. My little two-bedroom side of the house was next to the garages and driveway. It had a small side of the yard, which was 15 feet x 5 feet. We have a chocolate lab named Benny that uses that backyard for his bathroom, etc. The neighbor in my duplex, whom I'll call Rick, had the bigger side of the yard and a staircase that led up to the back field where there was a nice walking path and a horse farm. The back of our duplex was built into the side of the hill leading up to the horse farm corn farm. Rick was subletting one of his rooms to a Russian chain smoker whom we'll call Olga, and she was the same age as him, around 60. Rick is an a-hole 90% of the time and demands we never use his staircase to go up to the walking trail. His Russian friend and he also chain smoke in front of our living room window, making our house smell like an 80s-era bowling alley. Over the course of our renting this place, we got into numerous fights with these asshats over where they could smoke so that our side of the house didn't stink. The landlord lives in FL and uses the property as his retirement cash cow. We'll call the landlord Dwayne, and he's about 70 years old. The house itself was built in 1940 or earlier, and we lived on an old farm road with a pumpkin farm across the street. I just want you to have an image of the location because it'll come into play. The first week we're in the house unpacking, and my wife asks me to plug in the vacuum and run it around the downstairs to get up the styrofoam from the packing materials. I notice that the plug sparks when you plug or unplug anything. I call Dwayne and tell him, and he says, "Okay, call around and get a price from an electrician and let me know what it'll cost." This was a red flag for me. I'm paying $1,300 a month for this duplex, and now this guy wants me to do all his legwork since he is out of state. I figure whatever and find an electrician who'll charge $200 for the house call, plus the outlets he'll end up replacing. I call Dwayne and he says, "No, that's too much. I'll send one of my guys over to do it." This pisses me off because I just spent 20 minutes calling around getting ballpark quotes, but I figure it's fine as long as the work gets done. Fast forward 1 month, and his electrician finally shows up one day to do the work. He replaces 12 of the 14 outlets because he didn't think he'd find so many bad ones. I figure that's fine since the ones he didn't replace are in the room we never use. 2 months go by, and it's early spring, and it's raining a ton. One night we get a huge downpour that lasts for about 35 minutes. My wife says she hears water in the basement. I run down to the basement, and we have 2 waterfalls coming through the windows that look into the backyard, and there's 4 inches of water on the floor and rising. I call Dwayne the next morning and tell him about the windows in the basement and the flooding, and he says I need to find a cleaning service to clean up the mess. I tell him I can't because I'm going to work. He says, "Okay, do it after work then." I say, "Listen, I don't own this house, you do, so find someone today who can clean this up and repair the windows, or I'm going to do it myself and take it out of the rent, which is NY state law." He gets pissed and hangs up. Later in the evening he calls and says a cleaning service will be there in 2 days to clean the basement from all the mud and water. I tell him that's fine, but he might want to repair the windows since it's still raining pretty regularly. He says no, that won't be necessary since he's still getting quotes about a French drain for the back of the house. The cleaning crew shows up, and they clean the whole basement out. It takes them 6 hours with power washers and scrubbing machines, etc. They leave at 5 p.m. that day, and we're thinking, okay, great, now we have the basement cleaned up. But the windows aren't holding anything out since they are so old and have no sealant around the outside edges. 2 days go by, and it downpours again, filling the basement back up with water and mud. I call Dwayne, and he sounds defeated. He tells me that he'll send the cleaning crew back out the same day the contractors are going to show up with the backhoe for digging the French drain around the backside of the house. Fast forward 2 weeks and everybody shows up. The work is completed and we're happy to have a normal basement again, even though I'm pissed that we had a swamp down there for so long. 2 more months go by, and one night my wife screams while in the kitchen. She swears she saw a mouse in the kitchen run from under the sink to under the oven. I ask her what it looked like, and she says big gray and had pink ears. I know right away this isn't a field mouse, but a full-grown rat. I open the drawer below the oven, and all our cupcake pans are full of little rat turds, and it's nasty. Thankfully, we never bake, so they weren't a big loss. I call Dwayne, and he says he has an exterminator friend who lives nearby, and he'll call him and get back to me. Dwayne calls back the next morning and says, "I spoke to my friend, and he claims that your dog going to the bathroom in the backyard is probably attracting the rats." I tell him, "Rats don't eat crap, so that makes no sense. We'll need to have an exterminator sent out to deal with this." Dwayne goes on a tirade about how we're the worst renters, and that we constantly complain about little things. I tell him, for $1,300 a month, I expect a rat-free, spark-free living space that doesn't flood or smell like a bowling alley. At this point, Dwayne says he'll look into it and hangs up. I'm super pissed at this point. We've had nothing but problems with this place from the first week, and now we've got rats in our kitchen. I do a little digging online and find out that you can have the health department investigate rat infestations, and if they see that the landlord isn't doing anything about it, they'll put a lien on the house until the work is complete. So obviously, I decided to go that route. I call the health inspector, and he tells me that he'll come out in a few days to do an inspection and get back to me. Dwayne calls me back and says the rat problem is my fault because I have a dog and that I need to deal with the problem myself. I tell him, no problem, I just set up an appointment with the health inspector. Dwayne gets really upset and curses me out. I call my lawyer and tell him to call Dwayne and arrange for us to break the lease since I don't want to deal with him anymore. Fast forward 2 months. The health inspector found a bunch of rats and holes in the foundation and evidence that the colony had been living in the house for years and years from the looks of it. He contacts Dwayne and tells him about the lien if he doesn't address it. Dwayne calls me and says he's sending an exterminator. At this point, I had put the place up on Craigslist to find new renters since Dwayne had decided to sublet our lease instead of letting us out of it. I found some college kids who were desperate for a place, and they seemed like typical rich college kids. I tell them that the place doesn't have AC and they'll need window units, etc. But I also tell them that the next-door neighbor is pot-friendly and loves smoking. I tell them that he is super chill and that they can totally use the staircase in the backyard to access the hiking trails. One of the kids brought his mom, who showed up in a new Jag, so I knew that Dwayne wasn't going to be able to crap all over these people since I knew they'd lawyer up. I never mentioned the rat infestation, or that this place was a nightmare because I knew that these kids' rich parents would go nuclear with a lawyer if they had to deal with this stuff. Dwayne accepted the new tenants and let us out of the lease. All it took was a few threats from my lawyer before I got my security deposit back. Fast forward 3 months. I drive by the old place to see what's happening. It looks like the college kids and Rick are off to a rough start. There's a plastic divider down the driveway to separate who gets what. There are beer cans all over the front yard, and Rick's truck is parked on the side lawn. He never did that when we lived there, so I'm sure these kids were driving him crazy with parking. Olga is nowhere to be seen since she probably jumped ship when the parties started. I don't know what became of the rats, but 2 months later I did another drive-by, and there was no furniture on our side of the house, which tells me everybody had left, and Dwayne wasn't making any money, which made me happy since he was a ducking prick. The next one is a petty revenge story. This isn't necessarily my proudest moment, but I am tired of being the outcast. My 32F husband, Pete, 34M, comes from a family where the women are all bakers. I am a baker myself, and I used to sell baked goods out of my house under my state's cottage laws, but I stopped because I like it just being a hobby. His sister-in-law, Kay, 39, is the one who is known for her cupcakes and cake pops. When I first met everyone years ago, it was the first thing I learned. Everyone talked about everything she made. Even when Pete mentioned how good my stuff was, everyone would say that Kay sells hers and they're popular, so they must be better. Whenever I bring treats, they are often left untouched because they are not Kay's. Yes, I've been told that. They ask me to bring something to every get-together and never touch it. To be clear, Kay is mainly a baker, whereas I bake and specialize in professionally decorated cakes. Kay says that overly decorated cakes are compensating for their bad taste, and Pete's family agrees. We had a BBQ on Monday for Memorial Day, and everyone made their treats. Kay decided to bring cake pops. She posted them on her Instagram the night before. So, and I know this is immature, I made the exact same ones she did, same flavor and design. We got there and everyone asked where my treats were. I said they're in the car and I'll get them in a minute. So I waited for everyone to be outside, then I brought mine in and put them next to Kay's. After we ate, I noticed the family eating my cake pops and not Kay's. She didn't notice at first and then asked if they weren't enjoying the cake pops. They said they just ate them and they were the best she ever made, and asked what she did differently. Even my mother-in-law said they looked so much better in person than in the picture. Kay was confused, and said hers were still on the table. That's when I said, "Oh, I brought those, glad you enjoyed them." Her husband said he hadn't had one yet, lies, he ate too, and everyone else just said, yeah, they were okay. Kay didn't say anything the rest of the night. Pete thought it was funny. He didn't know what I did until the reveal. But his brother, Kay's husband, said yesterday that what I did was mean, and I'm just mad that Kay is a better baker. But Pete said it's ridiculous that the family, including Kay, puts down my baking when they won't even try it because I'm not Kay. ETA. We aren't the only two who bring desserts, just the ones who tend to bake cakes more than others. Everyone else's desserts get eaten to some degree except mine. The next one is an entitled people story. I was in a serious drunk driving accident about 20 years ago. The car struck a sycamore tree at 50 miles per hour. Relax. The tree was fine. Me, not so much. I was in the front passenger seat and the engine came through the firewall and crushed my legs, and the hot metal gave me second-degree burns. I also had broken ribs, a cracked sternum, and a punctured lung from the seatbelt, bruised internal organs, a broken nose, and a bunch of broken teeth. I was a mess. My roommate, hereafter referred to as Cooter, was there because he had a cyst on his arm. He was a miserable wretch. Fresh air would have pissed him off. He idioted constantly about literally everything and maintained a baseline level of hostility toward everyone, even his girlfriend. She stopped visiting him after the first day I was awake, and for some reason he blamed the nurses for it. You would think he was being bitten by fire ants. Whenever he was asked to rate his pain from 1 to 10, his answer was always higher than 10. Cooter was a cook at a fire hall. I don't mean he cooked for firemen. At least in my area, a fire hall is a sort of blue-collar private club with cheap beer and greasy food. I knew what he did for a living because he periodically called the guy covering his shifts to micromanage him and argue about inconsequential bullcrap. Meanwhile, I'm lying there with 14 broken bones and teeth that hurt whenever they were exposed to air. I had a chest tube and couldn't go more than 5 or 10 minutes without coughing, which hurts like a mother ducker when you have broken ribs. When asked to rate my pain, I figured a 10 would be like if your organs were hanging out or you were missing large patches of skin, so I think the highest number I gave was 4. I was in a miserable shape, but I hated hearing Cooter verbally abuse the hospital staff. If it weren't for him, I might have snapped at someone occasionally. But instead, I made a point of always greeting them with as much cheerfulness as I could muster, and always saying please and thank you, and expressing appreciation loud enough for Cooter to hear. I was worried about taking too many opiates, so I would wait until the pain was getting close to unbearable before asking for more. At one point, I asked for pain meds, and there was a perfect storm of bad luck. My prescription had run out. They only write for 2 days of pain meds at a time when you're in the hospital. But it was shift change, and they couldn't find anyone who was on my treatment team to write a new one. It took almost 2 hours to get it sorted out. No one could have faulted me for being a bit cross. A few hours earlier, when they had brought us our lunch, Cooter had thrown an epic tantrum because he had asked for peas and was given corn. He started yelling obscenities at the staff and threw his tray across the room. It took a good 15 minutes to get him another tray, and he didn't stop yelling until it came. Even after it arrived, he wasn't mollified. He snapped at everyone who came in for at least the next hour about the bullcrap, half-assed operation they were running. So when I had to wait for relief from my pain, I took great satisfaction in remaining cheerful. The nurses kept apologizing every time they came in to check on me and give me a progress update. I kept assuring them that I knew they were doing their best and thanking them for their efforts. I repeatedly said, "Don't worry, it's not like you brought me corn or anything serious like that." When they did get someone to write a new prescription, they started me off with a shot, so relief was almost instantaneous. As it kicked in, I told the nurse who had administered it, "You are an angel of mercy, and I love you." I had a long, difficult recovery. When I left the hospital, I moved to a rented hospital bed in my brother's living room. I needed a wheelchair for 3 months and crutches for 7 or 8 months after that. I had 2 more surgeries over the next year and a half, and it was almost 3 years before I could return to work. In large part because of my experience sharing a room with Cooter, I never lost my sense of humor. The next one is an entitled parent story. I think every female family member who is the youngest of the adult generation, or at least a teen, can relate to this. Yesterday, we had a kind of big family function for the 80th birthday of my gran. My mother's younger sister was there with her kids, preschool, elementary school age. And like every single time, I, 20F, was expected to watch the little demons while her mother can have some adult time. Don't get me wrong, I like them, but in small doses, and I can't understand why it's me since her husband was there. Since the weather was nice, it was a BBQ in my gran's garden, or a backyard like Americans would say. It was good. I saw some cousins of my generation, some of them I haven't seen in years. So, since I had Saturday off, I work in healthcare, I shared a beer with my cousins and caught up. Well, then my aunt came in and asked why I dared to drink, since I have to watch over her kids today since she needs some adult time. I just asked her what about her husband, and she gave me the whole sob story of, he worked all week, LOL, I did that too, even made overtime in the nursing home I'm working in, and that's his day off, again mine too, and that he is on the grill. He's literally standing next to my uncle who is actually grilling and sips beer. So I looked her dead in the eye and chugged the entire beer that I just opened, 0.5-liter bottle. Looked her dead in the eye while my brother, the saint he is, took the empty bottle out of my hand and gave me a new one. I told her sorry, but I already drank. She left in a huff, and of course she told my mother and my gran, and of course, my mom was upset with me because she's my aunt and yada yada. The only ones on my side were my brother and my stepdad, who nearly pissed himself laughing when he heard what I did. The next one is an entitled people's story. Being a CEO can be quite rewarding. Do not let the word CEO fool you. I am not a rich CEO who runs a corporate company. I run a small family business that has 2 separate locations. My parents run the original location that they started 20 plus years ago, and my brother and I manage the second location that we were able to open about 5 years ago. We are a small bookstore that offers an exchange program. We ended up getting a lot of our inventory for free because when customers donate books to us, we allow them to receive credit towards their entire purchase. It's like a store credit program. Anyway, that is not really the point of the story, but I have been an avid reader ever since childhood, so I am passionate about what I do. When I was about 10 years old, my family and I were in a car crash that left me paralyzed from the waist down. Because of this, I am in a wheelchair. I can do everything I need to do in the store. I can stock the shelves I can reach, talk to customers, check them out, and organize all the books. Sure, I must do things in a different way than my brother or our few employees, but I am still efficient and productive. Definitely not lazy. Well, that's not what Karen had to say a few weeks ago. I could tell from the get-go that Karen would be a problem. She walked in so snobby. But sometimes I can be wrong. So obviously I was going to help her regardless. However, that did not go so well. Me. Hey there, welcome to our bookstore. Is this your first time here? Karen. Actually it is. And it will be the last since the employees here like to fake disabilities. Me. I am sorry? Karen. You dumbass! Who do you think you are pretending to be disabled so that you can sit in your chair all day long? Me. Ma'am, no one here is pretending to be anything. I am paralyzed from the... Karen. Oh, shut up! You are too young to be sitting your ass in a chair? At this point, I was completely baffled. I've had a lot of different reactions to me being in a wheelchair, but never anything like this, and certainly never something so aggressive. If anything, most people are simply curious. They like to be nosy and ask questions, which after a certain amount of time I got used to it. I was left completely speechless. But what happened next left me even more speechless. Karen then proceeds to walk up to me, grabs the handles on my chair, and pushes my chair forward so that I fall out of it. It all happened so fast. I did not even have time to try and stop it or even process what was going on. At this point, one of our employees and my brother heard the commotion and came up from the basement. This is where we did a lot of book sorting, to see what was going on. My brother. What the hell? Bro, are you okay? Employee. Oh my gosh, what happened? Karen. You have lazy workers, that is what happened. My brother. He is paralyzed. You cannot just do that. My brother starts helping me up out of my chair, and the look on Karen's face is priceless. You can tell that she knows what she had just done was wrong, but she was not going to admit it. In fact, she kept the whole spiel going. Karen. I want to speak to the manager. My brother. Yes, well, you just assaulted one of them. Get the hell out of here, lady, before I call the police. Karen. Go ahead. I want the police officers to know you are phony and pretend to be disabled to get out of work. My brother gives a look at our employee, and she knows right away he is telling her to call the police officer. My brother tries to de-escalate the situation while our employee is on the phone, but Karen just kept getting crazier and crazier. Luckily, the police arrived quickly, and we were able to tell them the entire situation that had just happened. Karen, of course, tries telling the police that she should have been the one calling the police to report someone faking a disability, but the police were not buying it. My brother, listen, I am telling you this is a family business, and my brother and I run this store. Why would we jeopardize that and fake a disability? Karen. Yeah, right. I am not leaving until I talk to the real manager or owner. At this point, we are exhausted dealing with her, and we even tell the police that they can check our security camera to verify that she really did push me out of my chair. I made the point to the police that even if she did think I was faking a disability, what gives her the right to push me out of my chair like that and put her hands on me? Well, the police officers agreed with that logic. My brother and I told the police that we wanted her out of there, and that if she did not leave, then we wanted to charge her with trespassing. Of course, Karen starts freaking out, but even then, she surprises us by throwing herself on the floor and kicking and screaming like a child. I was so shocked. Just when I thought it could not get any worse, it does. Luckily, the police are able to remove Karen from the property, and we were able to file a restraining order so that she is not allowed to come back. Like I said, I was used to people questioning my wheelchair or asking me about being paralyzed. I have never experienced anything like that, even until this day. That was the only time someone has ever gotten physical with me. It is sad that people are so ignorant or uneducated that they assume people like me are lazy or just faking it. I have been through a lot and been through even more learning to navigate a life of paralysis. I hope that one day people will not make assumptions about disabled people because we are capable of anything just like everyone else. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Quick backstory to keep it from being too boring. I had recently lost my job, like most people at the time, and was having to do odd jobs on Craigslist just to get by. I recruited a friend to help me with various odd jobs since he was in a similar situation. We pooled our resources and cobbled together enough equipment to do landscaping work, along with other manual labor jobs. We were both young, in our early 20s, and didn't really know when we were being scammed or fooled. We got a call from one of our ads to do some landscaping work for a guy who happened to live about a mile away. Awesome! We wouldn't have to spend much on gas, but we would have to sacrifice our Labor Day weekend to do the job since it was a large one. The guy asked us to put in a raised bed that essentially wrapped around his entire house. Imagine a house in a newly built subdivision with a smallish yard and a few trees. He wanted the bed to be built with landscaping bricks and wanted us to replicate a style that his neighbor had done. Cool, no problem. We tried to discuss payment, but he kept giving us the runaround. Due to our desperate situation, we were fooled into doing the work without agreeing upon a labor fee. This was our mistake, one that was never repeated. We were just happy to have some work. We spent 2 full days working our asses off in the middle of summer without really knowing what we would get paid. We used our tools, truck, and time, grinding away, but we kept wondering why this guy was acting so shady. Finally, on day 3, near the end of the day, I had had enough of the runaround, so I knocked on the door and confronted the guy about payment. He started getting aggressive and threatening us with non-payment, which immediately escalated the situation. I grabbed my friend and brought him into the argument. After about 30 minutes of arguing, the guy decided he would pay us $70 for the work. Yeah, $70 to split between us after 3 days of labor. Cool, screw us, right? We loaded up our truck with the tools and waited for the guy to come out with our cash. This person came out with a huge wad of cash but proceeded to only hand over $70. Jerk. We collected our money and grabbed our last item, a tarp. We had been using a really large tarp to put weeds, grass, and extra dirt on to make our lives easier since we didn't have a wheelbarrow at the time. The accumulated mound on this thing had to have been 4 feet high. We dragged it into the middle of his front yard and dumped the tarp. This was the first duck you. He was begging us not to do it, but he could eat a dick at this point. We loaded up and sped off, because, angry youngsters. Now for the pro-revenge part. My friend's mom was a professional landscaper. She heard our story and offered some excellent revenge advice. Take the backpack sprayers we had, fill them with a warm saltwater mix, then ride over and spray his yard. We planned to do this about 2 months later. When the time came, we executed the plan late at night, around 2 a.m. We parked down at the pool parking lot, walked down to his house, and absolutely drenched this guy's yard. We came back about a month later and everything was dead or dying. Flowers, grass, small trees, everything. Mess with the guys who are doing your yard work? Screw your yard. The next one is a petty revenge story. Many years ago, I worked for an organization providing frontline customer service. It was a decent place to work, but our manager had lots of rules. One of the rules was that we could not do any personal printing with the printers at work. If we did, we were expected to pay 50 cents per page for black and white printing and $1 per page for color. I'm not sure who made this rule, but the manager was constantly reminding us. Our desks were not assigned, meaning any day you could be sitting at any desk, depending on your assigned tasks for the day. One day, I was interviewing for another job within the organization, but at another location. Prior to the interview, the manager of the other location asked me if I'd mind printing a copy of my resume and bringing it with me, as their printers were down for the day. I said no problem, and figured I'd print it at work since it was work-related. I was sitting at a desk that did not have a printer. The closest printer was located between my manager's desk and an employee's desk, so I printed it and stood up to go get it. Before I could go to the printer, my manager got there first. My print job went ahead of hers. When she saw what I had printed, she said, "OP, this looks like a personal print job." I explained it wasn't, but she disagreed and said since it had nothing to do with our day-to-day work, I had to pay $2 for 4 black and white pages. I begrudgingly paid up. I asked her what happened to the money, and she said she always put it in the Christmas party fund. All right. A few weeks later, I was sitting at the desk with the printer. It was lunchtime, and everyone except my manager agreed to go to a nearby restaurant for lunch. I had walked out of our building and realized I forgot my wallet, so I quickly ran back in to get it. When I got to my desk, I could hear the printer going. I was curious about what was being printed as it was spitting out page after page. I quickly glanced at the pile and saw at least 100 pages printed in color, announcing a Sweet 16 for Trista, our manager's daughter. It very obviously belonged to my manager. My manager came out of the bathroom a moment later and seemed shocked to see me standing there. I picked up the pile and passed it to her, telling her that our Christmas party fund was going to get a big boost. She said nothing but looked really uncomfortable. A few weeks later, our district manager made his quarterly visit. He talked about the upcoming Christmas party and how excited he was for it. I decided it was time for some petty revenge. I raised my hand and said, "Just wondering how much we've accumulated this year for the Christmas party from print jobs?" He looked so confused and asked me to explain what I meant. So I told him about our manager's rule. He got really quiet and said he'd have to review this. The next day, my manager sent an email saying the printing rule was something she was misinformed about and would be abolished immediately. Me, being the little crap disturber I am, hit reply all and asked what would happen to the already accumulated funds. Someone else said we should have a nice healthy fund for a pizza lunch, and everyone agreed. The next day, I heard my manager ordering 10 pizzas for lunch. She also used her own personal credit card to pay for it all. Do I think she was pocketing the printing money all along? Absolutely. But it was fun making her sweat, and then having her spend nearly $300 the next day to make up for it. The next one is an entitled people story. I live in a second-floor apartment with my 2 teenagers and 2 cats. An old couple, 75 plus, live below us. The apartments are poorly maintained and not very well insulated. We can hear their TV, hear them talking, hear when she screams at him, when their 6-year-old spoiled brat grandson comes and throws tantrums, and whenever they open and close their door. Apparently, they have been continually complaining to the landlord about us being very loud. They continually bang on their ceiling when we drop something or close the bathroom door, which sticks. Or heaven forbid I get up at night for any reason. She screamed up the heating vent at me one night when I knocked my water glass off my bedside table. They shout when we walk up the stairs. They have also complained that we use too much water when we shower, which is 100% none of their business. Yes, my cats do run around a bit, but we keep them occupied, take them for walks, and they are pretty mellow as middle-aged cats tend to be. We do not listen to loud TV. The kids listen to music on their headphones. We don't jump or stomp or throw parties. It all came down to the other night around 10:30 p.m. when my son was up late making food and one of the cats decided it was playtime. Maybe ran around for 3 minutes while my son caught him. Bang, bang, bang on the ceiling. The cat goes into my daughter's room and promptly goes to sleep. The old man comes running up the stairs and bangs on the door. I don't answer because I'm in bed and the cat is put away. Next thing you know, they called the police with a noise complaint. A noise complaint for the cat and my son using the microwave. The police show up, the house is dark, I'm in pajamas, and the cats are asleep in the bedroom. They look at me and say, "You're in bed?" Me, "Yes." Them. And what was happening? Me, "My son was making food and the cat was running around." Them. "Well, cats and teenagers do that. Is that why they called us?" Me, "Yes." The cop then looks at his partner with a "what the hell" look on his face and says, "Jesus Christ, what a waste of time." Then he asked me if I wanted to file a complaint for harassment. The next day, the old lady shouts across the parking spots, "We are entitled to silence whenever we want silence. You are obnoxious and rude, and I'm going to get you kicked out of here." The landlord calls and is pissed. He says they have been continually complaining about how loud we are and it's ruining their quality of life, and we need to keep it down. So I told him what they were complaining about and that I am moving out in 60 days. If they call again, I will make a complaint of harassment because this is stupid. His response, "Okay, no problem." Note that 95% of their complaints have to do with regular daytime living noise. Occasionally something happens after 10, but rarely. Are they somehow entitled to silence at all times? In a shoddy first-floor apartment? Ha ha ha, right. I hope whoever moves in after I leave has small kids and plays loud pop music and does exercise videos in the living room. The next one is an entitled parent story. This has nothing to do with me personally. A close friend of mine, who we'll call Jake, asked me to write his story here as he is pretty crap with words and doesn't know how to put his feelings down. He has autism, which wasn't diagnosed until he was already an adult, and moved out of his mother's place and went no contact. His mother, who I'll call Wacky Wanda, WW for short, has always treated Jake like a baby, from the time he was born, up until he went no contact with her. He tells me that as far back that he can remember, she would make him wear bibs at the dinner table and always hand-feed him. She claimed it was because he was a special child that needed the extra help. His father, Frank, would always chastise WW for this, saying that he would never grow up if she kept babying him. She would get pissed and tell him that he was being ridiculous and that she loved her baby boy so much. Way too much, if you ask me. Jake began to believe that he was developmentally challenged because of her. W would show up at his school and throw a fit when the teachers wouldn't pull Jake out of class to see her. He began to deal with bullying from other kids who would call him a mama's boy and tease him about wanting his mommy all of the time. As Jake got older, he started fighting back against the bullying. Eventually, he started yelling at his WW whenever she would show up and tell her to go home and to leave him alone. This never went over well, and he tells me she would sit alone in her room and pout, crying about how he had hurt her feelings. He would always apologize, and she would coo at him and pinch his cheeks and say that she couldn't stay mad at him because he was her baby boy, and he was all she had in life, completely forgetting she had a husband, by the way, so ducking manipulative. Once Jake was a teenager, Jake started acting out and becoming more independent from WW. I don't know if everyone knows this, but not all autistic people are built the same. Jake is a very good-looking guy. He is one of those too pretty to look at type of guys. He started rebelling by getting his dad to let him get tattoos. He started smoking cigarettes and pot and began hanging out with the goth, morbid crowd in high school. He listened to heavy metal music and wearing a leather jacket, eyeliner, and black nail polish. His black hair was always cropped short and he smoothed it back with gel. And from the pictures I saw, woo-wee. Even I said if I had seen that walking by me, I would be turning my head to check him out. That gave him an ego boost. Not to mention he is very good looking, even without the makeup. WW hated Jake's style and said it made him look like a clown, and that his beautiful skin was too precious to destroy with tattoos and makeup. She threw his clothes away more than once, replacing them with clothes that she approved of. Frank would always take him to the mall so he could buy new ones, and Jake took pleasure out of throwing out the clothes WW gave him. She would still make them eat dinner at the table every night. She was one of those women that was very traditional about family dinner. They always sat down and she put a bib on Jake and hand-fed him his meal until he was finished. She would even spit on a napkin and wipe his face if he got anything on it. Jake noticed that whenever she did this, she would side-eye Frank with a smirk, like she wanted him to be jealous or something. Weird. The last time they ate together as a family, as soon as Jake sat down, she pulled out the bib. He tried to ask her not to do this as he was 16 and fully capable of feeding himself. She chastised him and told him to do as he was told. The bibs were too small and wouldn't even fit around his neck. He tried to tell her this, but she would just sit it on his chest, then start hand-feeding him by making plain noises. Jake tore the bib off and told her enough was enough. He was 16 years old and didn't need to be fed like a baby. You got upset and started whining. Frank suddenly blew up and told her to stop her crap because this was getting too creepy, even for him to tolerate. He tried to support her in the dread that her son was getting older and no longer needed her, but this was too much to take. Jake went to his room and didn't come out for the rest of the night. DW pouted and cried for more than a day in hopes of making Jake apologize for refusing her, but he refused. She realized she was losing the battle with keeping her son a baby forever. Time to amp up the crazy. Jake came home from school the next day and found WW in the kitchen, dressed up in all black eyeliner and lipstick, and she even dyed her hair black. She had spiked bracelets and a choker. She looked ridiculous. How I wish I could have seen a picture of this because it sounded hilarious. Jake was shocked and asked her just what the duck she was doing. He noticed the shirt she was wearing was cut way too low, and he could see way more cleavage than he was comfortable with. She bounded over to him and asked him if he liked it. He was too shocked to respond with what he wanted to say and said, "Sure." He tells me that she would push out her breasts toward him in an effort to make him look. For months after that, that was all WW would dress like. She would openly brag to her friends that Jake copied her style and she was so proud of him. She used to wear turtlenecks and mom jeans with slip-on shoes. She was the farthest thing from goth punk you can imagine. One night Jake was asleep. She climbed into bed with him and tried to cuddle with him. He woke up and felt someone touching him inappropriately. He turned around and saw WW. He freaked out and told her to get the duck out of his room. She pouted and cried until Jake went to leave. He noticed his door was locked and he had to unlock it to get out. He had to lock himself in the bathroom and she sat outside the door begging him to come sleep with her. Jake shouted at her that she was touching him inappropriately and that it wasn't okay. And it was weird she did this with the door locked. She screamed that that was how mommies show their love until Frank came out of their room to yell at her for the way she was acting, and that it was creepy for a mother to want to cuddle her 16-year-old son with the door locked. She screamed that he didn't understand the bond she and Jake had, and that he was jealous. Jake screamed that they had no bond. DW cried, and Frank shouted at her to move away from the door, or he would do something he might regret later. He took Jake, and they went to sleep at a motel for the night. Jake told his dad everything that happened. Frank finally had enough. He couldn't stand the weird and creepy behavior from WW anymore. He filed for divorce and got custody of Jake, and WW was given visitation rights. She was mandated to attend parenting classes and therapy, and she actually went, under the threat of losing any and all rights to her son, of course, but she staunchly refused to believe she had ever done anything wrong. Jake dreaded visitation, but as he was still a minor, he had no choice in the matter. He would go and make sure to lock his door to prevent her from coming in. She did give him space when he was at her house, for a while. When Jake was 17, his dad paid for him to enroll in driver's ed and got him a car. This went over like a fart in church because WW got pissed when Jake pulled up to her house in a brand spanking new car. She lost it and called up Frank to scream at him about how she was endangering her baby boy. He hung up on her. Things got worse once Jake started seeing a girl at school. She was a pretty blonde girl that dressed in similar fashion to Jake. When WW found out, she went insane. Jake was in his room sleeping and WW picked the lock. It was one of those push-in locks that a bobby pin can easily pick. What Jake told me next made my heart drop. She undressed herself and climbed into bed with him and began essaying him. He woke up and freaked out. He ran away from the house and drove back to his dad's in tears, and they called the police. You got arrested and imprisoned for 11 years. Jake became severely depressed and tried to unalive himself more than once. His dad put him into therapy and he got better over time, but he still struggles with everything his mother had done to him. Jake was formally diagnosed with autism and he is on medication that keeps him functional. He's one of the bartenders at my club and we're really close friends. He's best friends with my boyfriend Kyle. Jake has a girlfriend who is one of the sweetest women I've ever met. Jake and I have a connection because we both have experienced SA from relatives and we both are stronger for having gone through that. Sorry this was so long, but he wanted his story shared with everyone. The next one is an entitled people's story. It's been 2 long years since the devastating fire destroyed our home, and the scars of that experience still linger in my memory. The once cozy haven that my wife and I cherished was reduced to rubble and ash, leaving us with only painful reminders of what was lost. However, with insurance on our side, we embarked on the daunting task of rebuilding our lives from scratch. In the aftermath of the fire, we realized that living under the scrutiny of a homeowners association was not the paradise we once believed it to be. Our previous optimism shattered as we encountered obstacle after obstacle. The homeowners association, in all its glory, decided to make our lives even more difficult by contesting our plans to rebuild our home. Their claim? Our proposed design violated their precious bylaws and was not pretty enough to fit the neighborhood's outdated aesthetic. Our desire to create a more modern and functional home clashed with the Homeowners Association's rigid adherence to the past. We wanted an upgraded kitchen, a contemporary central air system, and a floor plan that reflected our personal style. Yet, the Homeowners Association insisted that we conform to the architectural norms of the 1930s when the neighborhood was established. Despite our attempts to compromise, our blueprints were repeatedly rejected without any clear justification. Countless meetings, compromises, and redesigns followed, as we desperately tried to appease the Homeowners Association's stubborn demands. We abandoned unique roof shapes and innovative fireplace designs, opting instead for a watered-down version of our original vision. Still, they were unyielding, claiming that the interior changes were too modern for the neighborhood's character. A year passed and frustration consumed our spirits. The Homeowners Association's relentless opposition left us feeling hopeless. They even went as far as threatening legal action, accusing us of violating their code and devaluing the entire community. Faced with mounting debts and the constant fear of a lawsuit, we resorted to hiring a lawyer to protect our rights and navigate this bureaucratic nightmare. Finally, the decisive day arrived, the day our lawyer faced off against the Homeowners Association representative in a crucial meeting. As our advocate presented our case, it was clear that our lawyer's prowess far exceeded that of our opponents. The logic and reason behind our arguments resonated with the Homeowners Association, and they finally relented. Our most recent blueprint, albeit with compromises, was approved, marking a significant victory in our battle against the Homeowners Association. With cautious optimism, we began construction on our new home. The design might not be as avant-garde as we had initially envisioned, but it bore the stamp of our resilience and determination. We focused on the positives: a charming porch, a soaring ceiling with an elegant chandelier that would infuse our rebuilt house with a touch of our personalities. Now, on the cusp of moving into our newly constructed abode, we can finally breathe a sigh of relief. The harrowing journey has taught us the immense power wielded by Homeowners Association S and the dire need for accountability. As we prepare to step into our restored sanctuary, I can't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and caution. The battle might be won, but the war against overbearing homeowners association S continues. The next one is a pro-revenge story. About 5 years ago, I bought a 1,500 square feet townhome condo in an up-and-coming town right in the downtown area. This is a valuable property, with home prices having increased 35% since I purchased it. It was a wonderful area within walking distance of everything I loved as a single bachelor. When I moved in, all my neighbors were wonderful, except for one person. She belonged to the Homeowners Association board but was moving on because you can only serve 8 years. Let's call her Gimpy J. Gimpy J is a 65-plus-year-old widow whose husband died unexpectedly from a heart attack. She doesn't have much to do. She met a man online and moved on, and I was happy for her. Talking to my passive neighbors, I heard bits and pieces of why things were problematic at the Homeowners Association because of Gimpy J and another woman who had to move because of age. On the board, the two of them bullied residents. They changed the landscaping from mulch to pine needles, stopped upkeep on the pool deck because they hated kids, and reported one house for anything and everything because their kids were too loud. Gimpy J even bullied a woman with MS because she was feeding feral cats and attracting raccoons and possums near our homes, leading to a call to animal control. Residents did not like her. I got married and my wife has been living with me for 2 years now. We are very happy. During this time, Gimpy J began spending more and more time with her new boyfriend, who lives about an hour away from our house in the country. She initially spent the weekend there, then a week, until she began living there all the time with very little time spent at our complex, maybe 15 minutes to 2 hours a month. Now, in our complex, there is only one rule on parking. Each resident is entitled to 2 spots close to their building, but not necessarily in front of their unit, and there is no limit to the parking spots you may occupy. The key word here is close. We have new folks on the board who are all under 40 years of age, and the place is starting to get spruced up. We have friends over regularly, and they park in front of our unit. Gimpy J had 2 hip replacements done, and we had not seen her in about 7 months. In our little area of the complex, there are 8 townhomes that face each other, 4 on one side and 4 on the other. There are 8 spots for 3 homes, and a handicapped spot for one of our neighbors. Gimpy J started coming back around in January for longer periods, a day on the weekend to go out downtown or to visit friends. She started complaining that we were in her spots. Again, there are no assigned spots. We were willing to move our friends' vehicles for her to another empty spot, that is, until she started occupying 2 spots at a time with her vehicle. This behavior continued, as she would come in taking 2 spots anytime she was here. The rules in the master deed say no vehicle can take more than 1 spot without written permission from the board of directors or property management group, and it cannot continue for more than 2 days with permission. This rule was meant to account for residents moving in and out. Suddenly that spring, my wife had a medical issue and was hospitalized for 4 days and on disability for 8 weeks. My mom was the only family member on both sides who had the capability of coming down to where we lived to help us out. She drove down, and we needed to occupy 3 spots. I promptly let our property management company know, and the board of directors know what was happening, providing them with my mom's make, model, and plate number, and that she would be here 6, 8 weeks, just in case anyone had an issue. Gimpy J's first time home in 6 weeks, we had a car in front of her house, but she had room for her vehicle. She marched over and banged, and I mean it was loud on the door, demanding we move the car and tried to open my front door and walk into my home. Yes, she tried to enter my home. It shook my dog who peed herself, it was that loud, and who in turn growled and chased her out. I promptly told her there was no assigned parking and the rule is 1 car, 1 spot. We would move a car out of respect one last time, and then we saw that she occupied 2 spots with her car as usual. The next time it happened, 2 weeks later, we refused to move our vehicle. We also began taking pictures for our records and communicating with our homeowners association about Gimpy J's erratic behavior. She continued to arrive, bang on our door, and scream at us for having a car parked in her spot. One time, while banging on the door, she dented the frame with her keys. A few more times when we were not home, she would come in and park, occupying 2 spots. I took more pictures for my records in case something happened because of her erratic behavior. Finally, it happened. About this time last year, I was at the gym, and I got a call from my mom and my wife, frantic that someone is going to tow my wife's car. I drove home as fast as I could, and it was Gimpy J's boyfriend's son and his girlfriend, whom we had never met. This person, who doesn't live here and has no business here, is screaming at us and insulting my pregnant wife and mother. My mother-in-law pays X dollars a month for these spots. "You duckers are breaking the rules. Imma tow that SUV," all while drinking beer. Now we know he can't do anything except scream and try to intimidate us outside. He calls his mother-in-law, who is not married to his father, about the situation. Gimpy J drives an hour to our complex. When she gets here, she parks her car behind all three of ours and gets out, blocking us in, and I had enough. I quickly snapped some pictures. I called the police. I will not feel unsafe or be harassed in my neighborhood by people who do not live there, or are barely there. Gimpy J realizes I called the police and moves her car. I print out all my documentation, pictures, and communication from the Homeowners Association. I quickly shower because I'm disgusting from the gym and throw on a nice polo shirt and shorts. My pregnant wife sits in her rocking chair, and my mother sits calmly at the kitchen table. The police arrive, and we can see them hollering, waving their arms widely, and screaming. The police come to the door, and we kindly open up. Gimpy J tries to walk in before I block her and ask her to leave my property, and I invite the police officers inside. We apologize that we even have to call them over something so petty, but our neighbor is acting crazy, and her behavior has been escalating. We explain what is happening, show them communication from the Homeowners Association, and show them pictures. The officer quickly had enough of these individuals. He imposes a no trespass order on my porch and will not let her near my property. If she steps foot on our walkway, she is in violation of the order and will be arrested. We watch him go back out and explain calmly to her, and she starts screaming along with her boyfriend's kid and his girlfriend. This goes on for a while, and the officer calls for backup, and a second car arrives promptly. Gimpy J promptly declares it's her property too, as she pays her fees and claims he can't do that because everything is community property outside of a home. She marches up to my stoop and he arrests her, charging her with disorderly conduct and harassment. The police then tell Gimpy J's boyfriend's son to go home. He gets in his truck with his girlfriend and they drive off. As soon as he hits the road outside of our complex, the second police officer pulls him over for DUI. That's right, the drunk guy screaming at my wife and mother had been drinking the entire time and was intoxicated. The police couldn't do anything in the complex but could when he hit the main road. Both of them were hauled off to jail, and we stopped hearing from them about parking. 2 days later, Gimpy J and her boyfriend show up to the complex and park her boyfriend's car in our lot and leave it parked in one spot to ensure it's hers. Well, they drive off, and we don't hear from them for a week, and no one is home. Since Gimpy J's boyfriend does not live here and his car is abandoned, I called the Homeowners Association to report it. They came and towed his SUV. Gimpy J put her house on the market 8 weeks later. The next one is a petty revenge story. My daughter, 19F, had a group of high school friends for years. Fast forward to her freshman year of college, and her new roommate becomes part of the friend group. I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer the same day she started classes that year. As the year goes on, her relationship with some of these friends starts to have problems, but the roommate still seems solid, so they sign a lease for sophomore year. By the beginning of sophomore year, all of her high school friends, 4, have turned on my daughter, and she's struggling to figure out why. By the end of September, she finds out the roommate has been playing both sides of the fence and has ultimately sided with my daughter's old friends and continues to see them regularly. This, of course, creates a nasty living situation for my daughter, but she does her best to manage through. As time goes on, I come to find out that her friends turned on her because they felt that her emotional needs were toxic for them to be around. My daughter was having panic attacks about my cancer and other normal things, and was reaching out to her friends for someone to talk to, but they couldn't handle it. A few weeks ago, the roommate invited 2 of these friends to stay over. My daughter asked that they pick another time, as she had work and then an all-nighter ahead of her to finish her finals, and she didn't want to be in the apartment if they were going to be there. The roommate ignored this request. My daughter walked in on them being there after work and had a panic attack. The roommate looked at her and said, "See, this is why you have no friends when you behave like this. What do you expect?" This week, my daughter managed to find a way to move out before the roommate came back from break. The couch, the coffee table, the rug, the pots and pans, the dishes, the shower curtain, and so on. All of it was my daughter's. The internet, the electricity, the water, all in my daughter's name. She took everything, moved out, and left the roommate to come back from break with none of it working, and all of the shared space items gone. And she left her a note signed, "What did you expect?" Oh, I wish I could be a fly on the wall when she walks in. Update. My daughter received a text from one girl in the group, not the roommate, asking if they can talk to her about bringing some of the stuff back, as the roommate was thinking of calling the cops. My daughter simply said, "No, I only took my stuff, so go ahead and call the cops, but don't ever text me again." So not much of an update, but at least we know that revenge was definitely served. The next one is an entitled people story, so this happened many years ago, sometime after I got my first major contract. My shop had to expand quickly to meet the needs of the contract, so I hired several people based more on qualifications than personality. I also failed to do proper background checks. Very important. Don't be dumb like me. This would prove to be a major misstep on my behalf. I hired a couple of older gentlemen who had shoes older than me. Great group of guys for the most part. One guy I hired will be forever burned into my brain, and is why I am very careful about who I hire nowadays. The guy named Doug, yeah, Doug can bite one, came to me with over 20 years of experience and every certification needed for the job. Doug told me he was let go from his previous job because of downsizing. I didn't care what the reason was, I needed people. I hired Doug, and at first he was great. He didn't start showing his true colors until about a month after being hired. The first thing was him being caught in the men's room pleasuring himself. He also never closed the stall door, claimed he was claustrophobic. The next day, he was rubbing his pants while looking at a Victoria's Secret catalog. I told him to cut it out but enter the wrench. During this time, a union stepped in and my shop unionized. We eventually came to terms on a lot of stuff, but at first it was very rough. They felt that I was being unfair to Doug. I backed off and Doug got worse. He started walking around touching some of the mechanics. Eventually, the union and I came to an agreement that Doug has got to go. We sat him down and I handed him his last check. What was to follow I was shocked about and will never forget. Doug pulled his pants down and told us all to suck it. His language was far worse. I just can't bring myself to type that. It is burned into my brain what he did say, and it would make a porn star blush. He walked out with his pants down, yelling at everyone. I paid for a tow truck flatbed to move his toolbox to his house and thought it was over. Enter his revenge. The next day, he entered the employee parking lot and took a crowbar to every car. When one of the guys went to confront him, he pulled out a plastic gun. We all thought the gun was real and called the police. He finished smashing every windshield and drove off. Back then, I didn't have security cameras, so thankfully one of the guys recorded him. The police caught up with him and arrested him. He got a bunch of charges that I can't remember half of them, but I know he was charged with vandalism and threatening with a firearm. Now, if I were to run a background check on him before hiring him, I would have found out that he was on the sex offender list and had a record. And though background checks are often vague if they have anything at all, I would have known not to hire this guy. After that day, I installed security cameras, and I started performing background checks. Don't be dumb like me. The next one is an entitled parent story. This one's a sad story all around, but it primarily revolves around two kids with very sad stories. Worth noting, the people I was celebrating this Labor Day with have a very it-takes-a-village approach to child minding. An adult is left in charge of a little one, and if the little one and the adult part ways, the adult makes sure a different adult has charge of the kid. Leads to some interesting situations where a kid is MIA, but we've never actually lost track of one and have a 100% safety rate. Well, aside from trips and falls and scrapes, but that's just the price of doing business when you're little. The first kid is Max. He's 5 and was put in sole custody of his dad after his mom was arrested. He wears a diaper still due to the trauma he suffered, and his dad feels like he failed him and, as a result, seems to be incapable of disciplining the kid. It's been 2.5 years now, and people watch Max like a hawk because he can't be trusted near animals or with other people's things. When caught, he turns on the waterworks and his dad doesn't do anything. The second kid is Alicia, and she's 4 and was adopted by a pair of my friends. She's got a speech impediment that her bio parents tried to solve by beating it out of her. When we first met her, everyone was given firm instructions, no using the R word in her presence at all, for any reason. Second rule, if she feels comfortable enough to speak to you, you listen. Period. Third rule, no surprise hugs, no fist bumps, no high fives. If she's having a good day, low fives are allowed. If she gets triggered, she just shuts down, doesn't cry, doesn't do anything, doesn't respond to outside stimuli. She just goes away, and it is the saddest thing to see. Sweetest little kid, though. Her smile lights up the whole room when it comes out. On to the events. Alicia has just hit her Y phase a few years late for obvious reasons, and she'd ask me why she gets shocked by doorknobs while running around in stocking feet. I happen to rather enjoy these questions, and I was in the middle of a talk with her about why that is. She was speaking when Max and his dad arrived. I was down on my haunches and listening very closely when Max runs up and just shoves Alicia to the ground and says, "Shut up, Weetod! Uncle OP, my iPad is broken, can you fix it?" brandishing a tablet at me. I won't lie to you and say it wasn't a struggle to keep my voice even, but I knew yelling would only make things worse for Alicia. "Excuse you? I'm not fixing a thing until you apologize to Alicia and wait your turn." "But Uncle OP, my tablet!" "Apologize and then wait your turn." "No!" "Then stop calling me uncle and find someone else to fix it. Bullies don't get my help and they certainly don't get to call me uncle." Poor Alicia was just lying where she fell, not even crying. Hadn't sat up, just looked like a robot that had run out of batteries. I scooped her up and told Max, "You stay right here while I find Alicia's mom. This conversation isn't over." He just starts screaming, "No bully, no bully." I snuck inside the house with Alicia where it was quieter for a moment and said, "Alicia, I know you're scared right now, but I need to tell you a secret. Can you nod if you can hear me right now? This is very important." I got the tiniest little nod and I told her, "Max has the exact same problem talking that you do, and I understand you much better. You can't tell anyone I told you that though, okay?" Bless her little heart. She actually whispered, "Really?" "Of course. Would I lie to you?" Tiny shake of the head. I tracked down her mom outside and gave her the Cliff Notes version of what went down. Mom looked like she wanted to rend Max limb from limb, but I told her the plan. She was appeased. They went someplace quiet so Alicia could come out of her shell, and I went back to where I'd left Max. Max was being held by his dad, and his dad was asking Max what had happened to his tablet, and he was just repeating, "No bully." Apparently, after I'd left, Max had smashed his tablet on the ground, and his dad had no idea what happened. I raised my voice a little so people would pay attention, and asked Max to repeat what he'd said to Alicia. He shook his head and started crying, still shouting, "No bully," and sobbing hysterically. When I relayed the exact events that happened, his dad had the grace to look ashamed. "Come on, OP, you know what he went through? Can't we cut him a break? He doesn't know any better." This is the canned response anytime Max is caught doing something like kicking a dog or stealing a toy or phone to play with. I was done. Further discussion ensued that I won't bother relaying, but Max's dad refused to do anything to actually discipline his child, just like every other time Max acts out. But this time we were done. This is so far across the line from acceptable, it boggles the imagination. We were planning on doing campfire s'mores after dinner, but I called an audible. The new plan is putt-putt golf and then ice cream, and whoever does the best at putt-putt gets the biggest, bestest ice cream the place has. Every single adult agreed Max and Max's dad shouldn't come with. They got to stay home and think about what they'd done. Miraculously, her recorded scores for putt-putt were 18 hole-in-ones, and listening to her laugh while she tried to contend with an ice cream that was very nearly as big as she was made everyone's night. Max and his dad were gone by the time we got back. I hope his dad gets his act together. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.